300 painted warriors formed an unbroken line across his property, their silence more terrifying than any war cry. Each face remained motionless, eyes fixed on Malachi Brooks as he peered through his cabin window, coffee trembling in his grasp. Just yesterday, he'd been nothing special, an inexperienced homesteader who'd never known a woman's touch or understood the intricate ways of the native peoples who called these vast grasslands home. Now he found himself at the heart of something beyond his comprehension. All because of a simple act of kindness and a stranger's mysterious smile, the tempest had swept in without warning the evening before, transforming the heavens into an inky void and unleashing torrents of rain across his remote settlement. Malachi had been tending to his livestock in the modest pen when movement caught his eye, a silhouette struggling against nature's fury, raven hair clinging to her frame. Traditional dress drenched completely. Her movements spoke of exhaustion, each stride purposeful yet weary, as though battling forces beyond the storm itself. Instinct guided his actions. "Miss, you need refuge?" he called, rushing toward her through the muddy ground. When she turned, even through the downpour, her obsidian eyes held terror, not of him, but something else entirely. Something that made her constantly check the forest behind her. "I must not linger," she whispered, her voice nearly lost beneath the thunder's roar. Her words carried a careful accent, each syllable deliberately chosen. "My tribe expects my return?" But as lightning illuminated her shivering figure, Malachi followed the lessons his deceased mother had instilled in him: show compassion to those in need. Without pause, he removed his heavy woolen coat, the same one his father had worn through brutal winters, and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. The moment the garment settled upon her, her entire demeanor transformed. She gazed at the weathered material as if it were spun gold, then met his eyes with an intensity that set his pulse racing in unfamiliar ways. "You offer this freely," she breathed. "Until the weather passes," he responded, feeling warmth creep up his neck. "You're shivering." She drew the coat closer, and for a heartbeat, they stood together in the deluge, two souls sharing something far greater than a simple gesture of kindness. Then came her smile. Not mere gratitude, but something profound that seemed to touch corners of his spirit he'd never known existed. "I am called Ayana," she revealed, "Malachi Brooks. I shall remember your generosity, Malachi Brooks." She vanished into the darkness before he could offer proper shelter, leaving him alone in the storm with questions that had no answers. He couldn't have known that his compassionate act had set into motion events that would reshape not only his existence, but the delicate harmony between two very different worlds. Now, staring at the silent army beyond his fence, one question consumed his thoughts. What force had he unleashed? The sun climbed higher, yet the warriors remained statue still. Malachi had observed them for 3 hours, his breakfast cooling untouched, his mind cycling through every conceivable reason for their presence. They posed no direct threat, but their overwhelming numbers chilled his blood. 300 men could overwhelm his modest homestead within moments if they chose violence. He attempted his usual morning tasks, feeding poultry, checking water supplies, but every action felt scrutinized, evaluated, judged. The warriors' decorated faces followed his movements, their expressions impossible to read. Some bore bows, others carried lengthy spears, yet none had prepared their weapons. They simply stood like living monuments, creating a human barrier. Spanning his entire property boundary, as morning progressed, Malachi noticed something that tightened his stomach with dread. Additional warriors continued arriving. Small bands emerged from distant ridges, their mounts moving steadily toward his ranch. By midday, the initial 200 had swelled to nearly 300. They positioned themselves with military precision, filling every gap along his fence until their formation showed no weakness. That's when realization struck: this wasn't coincidental. This wasn't some hunting expedition that had stumbled upon his land. This was deliberate, calculated, intentional. But why? Memories of Ayana's grateful expression haunted him. How she'd regarded his jacket as though it held meaning far beyond practical warmth. The deliberate way she'd pronounced his name, giving each sound importance. The fierce intensity in her dark gaze when she vowed to remember his kindness. His father had cautioned him about the complexities of tribal relations, but those warnings had seemed distant and academic. Now, facing hundreds of armed warriors at his doorstep, Malachi wished he'd listened more carefully to those teachings. Around noon, movement drew his attention. One warrior, taller than his companions and adorned with an elaborate feathered headdress, dismounted and approached the cabin. Unlike the others, war paint didn't mark this man's features. His expression was grave but not hostile, and he moved with the assured gait of someone accustomed to authority. Malachi's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle mounted above his hearth, then stopped. 300 warriors against one inexperienced rancher, the weapon would only guarantee his own demise. The leader halted precisely 10 paces from Malachi's front steps and spoke in clear, unaccented English. "Malachi Brooks." It wasn't a question, the man knew his identity. "Yes, sir," Malachi replied, stepping onto his porch despite his trembling knees. "I am Takakota, chief of the Lakota band that travels these territories. We have come regarding—" "The woman," Malachi's heart pounded against his ribs. "What woman?" Takakota's eyes narrowed, studying Malachi's face with the intensity of someone reading tracks in challenging terrain. "The woman you sheltered during the tempest. The woman who now bears your coat." The simple words struck Malachi like physical blows. Ayana still wore his jacket, but why would that concern an entire tribe? "She was cold," Malachi said weakly. "I was merely being neighborly." Something flickered across Takakota's weathered features, an expression Malachi couldn't interpret. When the chief spoke again, his voice carried weight that made the atmosphere feel oppressive. "Young rancher, do you understand who she is?" The question lingered like smoke from a distant fire. Malachi stared at Takakota's lined face, searching for clues beyond his comprehension. The silence stretched while 300 warriors awaited his response to a question he didn't grasp. "She said her name was Ayana," Malachi replied, his voice smaller than intended. "That's all I know." Takakota's expression darkened. "That is not all you need to understand." The chief turned and gestured toward the assembled warriors. Each of these men would sacrifice their lives for her without question. They have ridden for 2 days straight, abandoning their families because word reached us that she had been seen with a white rancher wearing his coat. Malachi felt blood drain from his face. "I don't understand, it was just a coat." "Just a coat," Takakota repeated, something in his tone making Malachi's skin crawl. "Tell me, young rancher, what was her reaction when you offered it?" The memory returned with uncomfortable clarity, how Ayana had stared at the jacket as though it were precious, how she'd asked if he would truly give it to her, the intensity in her eyes when she'd pulled it around her shoulders. "She seemed surprised," Malachi admitted, "like maybe she wasn't accustomed to kindness from strangers." Takakota nodded slowly. "She is my daughter." The words hit Malachi like a physical blow. The chief's daughter. He had given his jacket too. The chief's daughter. No wonder 300 warriors had appeared at his fence. "Sir, I meant no disrespect," Malachi stammered. "I was only trying to help. I didn't know who she was." "That much is evident," Takakota replied. "If you had known, you would never have dared approach her." Malachi's mind raced. Was this about honor? Had he somehow violated their customs by speaking to her, by touching her with his jacket? The possibilities terrified him. "What happens now?" he asked. Takakota studied him for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to weigh Malachi's soul. "That depends on many things. Why was she alone in the storm? Why did she accept your jacket? And most importantly," the chief's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, "why did she not return home last night?" The final question hit Malachi like ice water. "What do you mean she didn't return home?" "Ayana left our camp 2 days ago to gather herbs for her grandmother's medicine. She should have returned before the storm. When our scouts found her horse this morning still wearing your jacket, she was nowhere to be found." Malachi's legs nearly gave out. "You think something happened to her?" "I think," Takakota said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, "that the last person to see my daughter alive was you." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Malachi could feel the eyes of 300 warriors boring into him. Their earlier stillness now felt less like patience and more like the calm before violence erupts. She left on her own, Malachi protested. I offered her my cabin, but she said her people would worry. She walked back into the storm, wearing your jacket. Yes, but I told her she could keep it until Malachi's words died in his throat. As he realized what Takakota was truly telling him, Ayana hadn't made it home. She had disappeared somewhere between his ranch and her camp, and he was the last person who had seen her, but there was something else in the chief's eyes, something beyond anger or grief, something that looked almost like hope. There is one way to prove your innocence, young rancher. Takakota's words sent ice through Malachi's veins. Prove his innocence. The way the chief said it suggested the proof would be neither simple nor safe. What kind of proof? Malachi asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. You will help us find her. The statement was so unexpected that Malachi blinked in confusion. Help you find her? But I don't know anything about tracking or... You know where you last saw her. You know which direction she went. Most importantly, Takakota's eyes hardened. You know why she was fleeing? Fleeing? The word escaped Malachi's lips before he could stop it. Takakota stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a shadow over Malachi despite the noon sun. My daughter is the finest rider in our tribe. Her horse does not spook easily, and she knows these lands better than the wolves that hunt them. For her to be caught in that storm alone and on foot means something drove her from her horse before she reached safety. A chill ran down Malachi's spine as he remembered Ayana's behavior during the storm, the way she had kept glancing over her shoulder toward the tree line, the fear in her eyes that hadn't seemed directed at him, the exhaustion in her movements. As if she had been traveling hard for hours. She seemed scared, Malachi admitted, but not of me. She kept looking behind her toward the woods. Exactly. Takakota's voice carried grim satisfaction. Someone was following her. Someone who means her harm. And now she has disappeared between your ranch and our camp, somewhere in those 12 miles of wilderness. The mathematics were brutal in their simplicity. 12 miles of rough terrain, countless hiding spots, and a woman who had vanished. Without a trace. If she was injured or trapped somewhere, every hour that passed reduced their chances of finding her alive. But why do you need me? Malachi asked. You have 300 men who know this land better than I ever will. Because, Takakota said, whoever took my daughter knows we would search. They will avoid the obvious paths, the places we would look first, but they might not expect a white rancher to be hunting with us. Your presence changes their calculations. Malachi felt the weight of 300 stares pressing down on him. The logic was sound, but it also meant riding into unknown danger with men who still might decide he was responsible for their chief's daughter disappearing. And if we don't find her? He asked. Takakota's expression grew stone cold. Then you will discover why my people have survived on these plains for 1,000 years while others have not. The threat was clear, but something else worried Malachi more. The way Takakota kept referring to someone taking Ayana as if her disappearance wasn't random, as if the chief knew more about the danger his daughter faced than he was revealing. Who would want to hurt her? Malachi pressed dot for the first time. Takakota hesitated. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested old wounds and complicated histories. There are men who believe taking a chief's daughter would give them power over our tribe. Men who think one woman's suffering is worth the chaos it would bring to our people. Other tribes? Worse, Takakota said grimly. Men from our own band who hunger for leadership they have not earned? The revelation hit Malachi like a physical blow. This wasn't about strangers or outside enemies. This was about betrayal from within Ayana's own people. How do you know? Malachi asked. Takakota's jaw tightened. Because yesterday, before she left camp, 3 young warriors asked permission to court my daughter. I denied them all. The pieces of a darker puzzle began falling into place in Malachi's mind. 3 rejected suitors, a chief's daughter who fled into a storm rather than face whatever was pursuing her, warriors who might believe that possessing Ayana could somehow transfer Takakota's authority to them. Which 3 men? Malachi asked. Takakota's expression grew even more grim. That is why we need you, White Rancher? I cannot accuse my own warriors without proof. But if one of them has taken Ayana, they will not expect me to ride with a stranger. Your presence will make them careless. The strategy was cunning and dangerous use. Malachi as an unwitting decoy to flush out potential traitors among Takakotas. Oh men. If the chief was right, one or more of the assembled warriors outside Malachi's fence was complicit in Ayana's disappearance. What if you're wrong? Malachi asked. What if it wasn't someone from your tribe? Then we follow the other trail. What other trail? Takakota pointed toward the distant mountains. 2 days ago, army scouts were seen near our territory. White. Soldiers looking for something they claimed to have lost. They asked many questions about young native women. Malachi's blood turned to ice water. Army scouts hunting for native women could only mean one thing, and it wasn't anything good. Stories of soldiers taking native women as slaves or worse had reached even his isolated ranch. You think the army took her? I think, Takakota said carefully, that someone wanted us to believe the army took her. But my daughter is too smart and too fast to be caught by clumsy horse soldiers. She would only be taken by someone she trusted. The implication hung between them like a noose. Someone Ayana trusted had betrayed her, someone close enough to approach her without raising suspicion. Someone who knew her habits, her roots, her weaknesses. How can I help track someone through country I don't know? Malachi asked. You cannot, but you can watch faces while I track. You can see which of my men seem nervous when we search certain areas. You can notice things an outsider would notice that I, as their chief, might miss. It was a dangerous game Takakota was proposing. Malachi would be riding into hostile territory with men who might be enemies, looking for clues to identify traitors among warriors who could kill him before he could even draw breath to scream. But the alternative was standing by while Ayana remained missing, possibly dying somewhere in the wilderness while precious hours ticked away. If we find who took her, Malachi asked, what happens then? Takakota's smile was sharp as a blade. Justice. The single word carried more menace than any threat Malachi had ever heard. Whatever justice meant to a Lakota chief, it wouldn't be gentle. When do we leave? Malachi found himself asking. Now, every moment we delay gives them more time to hide her, or... Takakota's voice faltered slightly, to ensure she never speaks of what she has seen. The urgency in the chief's tone told Malachi everything he needed to know about Ayana's chances if they didn't find her soon. This wasn't just about a missing woman anymore. This was about preventing a murder. I'll get my horse, Malachi said, turning toward the stable. Takakota's voice stopped him cold. Bring your rifle, White Rancher, and pray to whatever God you believe in that we find my daughter before nightfall. The chief's words carried a finality that made Malachi's hands shake as he reached for his saddle. Whatever they were riding into, Takakota clearly expected it to end in blood, but as Malachi prepared his horse, one thought kept echoing in his mind. If Ayana had been taken by someone she trusted, someone from her own tribe, then riding out with Takakota's warriors might not be a rescue mission. It might be riding straight into a trap. If you found this story compelling, click on the recommended video to discover another gripping tale from the frontier where bravery and fate intersect in unexpected ways. Remember to subscribe and consider supporting us to help create more captivating stories like this one.